200 years ago in this world, the void was opened by a man named Theomore, forever known from that day forward as Wicked Theomore. Because through that void came all manner of dangerous creatures. Now, some thrived and some didn't. However, the most successful creature that came through the void were the Lynx. Big, powerful, winged creatures, sharp claws, menacing teeth, and a hunger for human flesh. But by far the most dangerous thing about the Lynx is their intelligence. They are as intelligent, and some would argue even more so, than humans. And so, 50 years after they arrived, the war began. A war for survival between the humans and the Lynx. It's been 150 years since the war began, and humanity is on the verge of defeat. Our story begins in one of many manufactories spread across this world. These are massive factories that humans use to create their weapons of war, and most of the workers live there. The foreman of this manufactory is a man named Grist, and he's angrily moving through it in search of a particular worker. Tian is working at her desk when her foreman suddenly bursts in and places a small device on her table. That device is called a hedron, and it's a vital component for one of humanity's most important weapons. That weapon is the Clanker, a massive tank armed with javelins and spears. It can carry up to 10 soldiers with their equipment and has multiple legs that allow it to move through all kinds of terrain. But it's a very uncomfortable ride. Tian asks what she's done wrong, and he tells her that the last 3 hedrons she made all failed. This resulted in the loss of 3 clankers and 20 soldiers. She understands how bad this is, because if the manufactory were to run at maximum power, they'd be able to make 12 clankers, at most, within a year. Now, Tian is shocked by this because she takes great care in her work. In fact, she's one of, if not the best artisan in this manufactory. And she makes sure that every hedron is working perfectly before she hands it in. She takes out the crystal within the hedron and touches the pendant around her neck. By doing that, artisans like Tian can access the field. The field is an aura that comes from naturally occurring nodes spread out all through Santana. Artisans can visualize and manipulate the field to tune the hedrons so they can draw power from it. The hedron had some power, but it was a very small amount compared to what it should be drawing from the field. And without the power, the clankers are nothing but junk metal. Tian assures the foreman that she'll investigate this and fix the problem. Almost immediately, Grist then asks her when she's going to get married and have children. After all, she's 20 years old, and that is more than old enough to start bearing children. You see, because of the war, everyone has 2 duties. The first is to make use of the skills you have in order to help humanity win the war. That could be as a miner, a clanker operator, an artificer, etc. The second is to bear children so humanity's numbers can be replenished. Tian doesn't like the idea of this, and besides, she doesn't like any of the men in the manufactory. So she simply tells Grist that she's working on that too. Time passes. Grist has long since left, and Tian has had enough of work for the day. She decides to head out to the mine, hoping to meet up with her best friend in this world. She had to get past a couple of guards as she moved through the mine. It wasn't a problem though, as both knew her very well and were very friendly towards her. Deeper down the mine she went until she spotted her friend. Joan was a wise old man, at least in his 70s. After a short greeting, Joe offers Tian his food because he's not happy with how skinny she looks. She tries to protest, but Joe isn't having it. While eating, they have a long chat. Tian talks about the issues with the hedron, clankers, and soldiers that died. Joe also talks about the loss of his wife and son due to the war. A while later, they bid farewell to each other. Joe heads towards the miner's village, while Tian returns to her room in the manufactory. She makes a detour to her office instead, as she wants to investigate the faulty hedron. Artisans can be trained to become better, but it is a skill that you are born with. The pendant around her neck is called appliance, and every artisan has to make their own to prove their worth. It is an artisan's badge of honor, maybe even their soul. Tian touches the appliance, and through her mind's eye, she enters the field. It's a dangerous task, as it could bring about hallucinations and even madness. Many artisans have been lost while they tuned the field. She works on the field for some time, but ends up with the same result: a crystal that doesn't draw enough power. Hungry and tired, she decided to end her investigation for the day and go to bed. Unlike most, rather than sleeping in a dormitory with others, Tian has her own room. A modest place, but she has her privacy, something very few people have. Tian slept poorly, and it was short as well. After getting dressed, she makes her way out, and as she opens the door, there stands the overseer of the manufactory. She steps back instinctively. He asks Tian how her investigation is going, and she tells him she has a few theories, but that she needs a little bit of time. After placing the other two faulty hedrons on her desk, he gives her an ultimatum. She has 1 week to fix the problem, or else he'll find someone else who can. And she'll be going to the breeding factory. It's been a while since Tian saw her mother, and she's decided to pay her a visit. Although she's supposed to ask permission from her foreman, she decides not to, as she's sure he'll refuse. It's a cold day, and the journey from the manufactory to her mother in Tixi will be a miserable one, but she carries on. She sticks to the tracks, passing a lot of people along the way, and as you can expect, the mood from most is sour. Eventually, she arrives in Tixi, a large city by the sea with its tall, thin buildings. She made her way towards the mother's palace, so called by the powers that be, but called the breeding factory by everyone in Santana. She hated this place, not only because of what it stood for, but because she came from it. A lot of children are born in a traditional family, but some, like Tian, were born in the breeding factory. Not only would they never know their fathers or have close relationships with their siblings, they were also indentured at a young age to whatever service they were skilled at. And in Tian's case, she is indentured to the manufactory because of her artisan skills. At least for now anyway, as she planned to buy herself out of it. Inside the breeding factory, Tian takes a deep breath before she pushes open the doors to her mother's room. Her mother, Mani, was asleep. Tian kissed her on the cheek to wake her up. Mani was treated with great reverence here. Not only had she given birth to 15 children over the years, all of them were highly skilled and sought after. Tian loved her mother, but also resented her. Mani could never tell Tian who her father was. She also sold off all her children at a young age, and none of them saw even a small amount of what she was paid. So these meetings always ended in a big fight between the two, and today would be no different. Tian's reason for visiting her mother today was to ask where she got her skills from, the power to visualize the field. Mani told her that it came from her, and from her mother before her. This didn't surprise Tian, as she knew that Mani's family was well respected. Mani's mother was a court philosopher, and her grandmother was a scribe to a governor. Thinking about Mani's choice to become a breeder angered Tian, and an argument broke out between the two. Before you know it, Tian was out the door and on her way back to the manufactory. It's evening by the time Tian gets back to the manufactory. She searches for the foreman, and when she finds him, she tries to bring up the subject of the faulty hedrons, but he swiftly pulls her away, as he does not want others to hear about these problems and further reduce the morale of everyone. The foreman confirms to Tian that it wasn't just her hedron that was faulty, but it's an issue for many others all over Santana. She's relieved to hear this. After a brief discussion, she decides to head to the old master crafter's room. He had passed away, and until his replacement was found, no one would use his office. Not even Tian, who was the senior artisan. The late master crafter was very disorganized and kept terrible notes. She spent hours reading through his journals in the hope of finding something that would help, and she was getting nowhere. She decided to search the place a bit more in the hopes of finding something hidden. To her surprise, she found a hidden compartment, and there was a book within it. A forbidden book describing the origin and other theories of the Mancer arts. The penalty for getting caught with such a book would be terrible. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she hid the book in her jacket. She's surprised by a young and very attractive lady standing at the door. This is Iris's, Tian's immediate junior in the manufactory and her rival. They are opposites in almost every way. While Tian is an introvert, Iris is very much an extrovert. They are both highly skilled, but excel at different aspects of the craft. Every time they meet, it becomes a battle of wits between the two. Iris wants to be the boss here, but Tian is above her. A position given to Tian by the late master crafter, who was in fact Iris's own uncle. Something that Tian liked to remind Iris of whenever they fought. After the usual fight between the two, Iris is winning this one, by the way. They both go to their respective desks to carry out their work. Before Tian knew it, the manufactory was silent, and it was midnight. She decided to head to bed, but found it very difficult to sleep, and so decided to read the forbidden book. Much of it was difficult to comprehend, but after reading for a bit, she comes up with the idea of building a device that would test the faulty hedrons. Just as she's about to doze off, she hears the familiar sounds of a clanker. A young clanker operator named Kayara jumps out of his clanker and walks towards the gates of the manufactory. And he's not looking well. Clanker operators have a very intimate bond with their hedrons. The bond is so strong that losing a hedron for them is like losing an arm or leg, or even a loved one. They can bond with a new hedron, but it's a difficult and painful process for them. Kayara had one of the faulty hedrons, so he's bonding with a new one, and it shows. The overseer is there as well, and Tian approaches them both. Kayara explains what happened with the faulty clankers and how the Lyrinx wiped them out. After a while, he leaves them both so he can get some rest, as he hasn't slept for a few days. Tian looks at Kiara as he walks away, and the overseer asks if she thinks he might be the one for her. She nods. He asks her to be cautious, because for clanker operators, their machines always comes first. He tells Tian that there is a more serious development. An experimental clanker was discovered and destroyed by the Lyrinx. She's not surprised by this, as clankers are very noisy. He looks around cautiously and whispers to her that this was a new, silent machine, the sound clanker, and it is her top priority to find out how the enemy is detecting them. Creo Nish Halar, a man of contradictions. He not only suffers from an underserved sense of self-importance, but also suffers from chronic self-loathing. He's a short, well-built man that comes from a well-respected family. He always had dreams of becoming a scribe to a great merchant, and then becoming a merchant himself one day. However, those dreams were shattered when he turned 16. At the age of 11, children are visited by the examiners. Their skills are appraised and they are sent off to their apprenticeships. Some children bloom early and their skills can diminish, while others bloom late and their skills improve drastically. So, the examiners visit the children once more at the age of 16. After Nish's examination, his parents had spoken with his examiner in somewhat of a panic. Before he knew it, and with an hour's notice, rather than continuing with his scribe apprenticeship, his parents had decided to ship him off to the manufactory. His parents' only instruction to him was that he keep his eyes and ears open, and then write to them detailing all he had seen and heard every day. And so began his new life as an artificer. He was not only the least knowledgeable apprentice at a manufactory, but to his annoyance, also the shortest. Creelmish was given the nickname Nish by many in the manufactory due to his unique nature, especially when it came to talking to women. The nickname was one he disliked. In the old tongue, it meant peep squeak. Unlike artisans like Tian or Irisis, who had the Mancer arts, artificers did not. And Mish was the least skilled artificer of them all. He admired and was jealous of the artisans because of their skill, and believed that artificers like himself were below him. Though he did not have the natural talent, Nish was determined and very hardworking. But there was a ceiling to how far he could go due to not having the latent skill. Out of the 4 artisans of the manufactory, only 2 were available: Irisis and Tian was his pick of the 2. Not only was Tian the best artisan here, but she came from the breeding factory. And in Nish's mind, that meant that his lineage was better than hers, and so was he. He saw Tian making her way towards her cubicle and decided that it was now or never. The moment had come to make her his. He rushes up to her, shouting her name. Tian turns to face Nish. He speaks loudly enough that the other artisans can hear what he says, telling Tian that he has always admired her work. A strange thing to say out of the blue, but Tian asks if there's anything he needs. In the clumsiest way possible, he asks Tian if she'd like to go for dinner or a walk with him. Embarrassed for a moment, Tian becomes angry. Although Nish is smart enough to recognize the danger here, he believes that this is his one shot, so he presses on. He tells Tian that they both have their duty and asks if she'd like to share a bed with him. She replies with venom and tells him in no uncertain terms that she would not share her bed with a filthy artisan, especially one as unremarkable as him. All the artisans can hear this conversation. Some are shocked by it, while others try to control their laughter. Nish tries to appeal to her sense of duty by telling her that it would be beneficial for both of them to come together. When this fails, desperation and anger overcome Mish, and he tries a spectacularly stupid tactic. He tries to threaten her, saying if she only knew who he really was. Before he could finish, Tian snaps. She tells him that she would rather bed in the rinks than had anything to do with him and shouts at him to get out. Nish returns to his workspace, defeated and angry. He vows that he'll make Tian pay for this. One day he will make her his, and then discard her. He turns around to find Tian's rival looking at him. Irisis gives Nish a savage kiss. Laughing, she grabs his hand and tells him to come to her room. After he has showered. It's nighttime. Irisis and Nish have been together in her room for some time. She inspected Mish as he lay next to her. A moment later, she calls in. It was time to put her true objective in motion. She asks Nish about his father, and he confirms to her that he had recently been promoted to a position of high importance. She then asks Nish about himself and his true reason for being at the manufactory, because it was clear to all that being an artificer was neither his calling, nor something he was particularly good at. Nish is not unintelligent and tries to avoid her questions. But right here and now, he is the prey, and Irisis, the predator. She expertly maneuvers her body, toying with him till his resistances are broken. He starts spinning it all. His true objective is not to be an artificer, but to be a prober. Probers are spies. Among the powerful, probers are the lowest in rank, going all the way up to the most unimaginably powerful, the scrutators. He tries once more to avoid Irisis' questions, but at this point, he's nothing more than a ball of fluff being toyed with by a cat. This manufactory creates the best hedrons and clankers in Sempina. The quality of the materials don't even matter. As a result, secretive machines that make hair. However, the Lyrinx always discover these secrets and destroy the new creations. Nish's job is to find the spy. Here is where Iris hopes to kill two birds with one stone. She tells Nish that she will help find the spy, and that she wants to be offered the position of Master Crafter in charge of all the controller works. Nish tries to tell her that he cannot, but she reminds him that she heard him offer the same thing to Tian. He gives in and tells her that he'll do his best. The deal is sealed. The next morning, Iris wakes Nish up from his happy slumber. She tells him that she has an idea. She believes Tian is the spy. This idea is beyond ridiculous to Nish. Not only is he fully aware that Tian and Iris dislike each other, Tian was the first person in the manufactory that he fully investigated. As a result, he knows with almost complete certainty that she is not. He tells her that Tian's schedule consists of working hard at her desk, visiting her friend Joe, and visiting her mother at the breeding factory. Tian is not the spy, but Iris persists. Nish tells her that she requires proof. She agrees to this and kicks him out of her room. Thinking to himself, Nish doesn't really care who the spy is. And if it's either of these two women, he won't take pleasure in turning them in, but he'll still do it without mercy. Tian is back again in the late Master Crafter's office. Although she searches for quite some time, she's unable to find any information that could help with the current problems. Rather than returning the forbidden book, she still decides to keep it. As she leaves the office, locking the door, Iris turns up, demanding to know what Tian is doing there. Tian simply replies that she's trying to find out how a hedron can be sabotaged without leaving a trace, and then walks off. Tian spends the next 3 days creating a controller device, which she can then use to look into the faulty hedron's field. She was successful, but after a few attempts, she realized that she would need a more powerful crystal for it. And so, with the help of the young sweeper boy named Goal, she went in search of one. Out of the manufactory and into the toxic ravine. No luck here, so she decides to pay Joe a visit. Tian asks people around the mine if they've seen Joe, but they all reply that they haven't. This gets her worried, as Joe is a very old man and he rarely misses work, so she decides to pay him a visit at his home. She goes through the miner's village and arrives at Joe's home. As she tentatively enters, she hears a gruff cough. To her relief, Joe is there. He doesn't look great, but he's alive. Something he reminds her of with a wry smile. He tells her that he's met his quota, and due to his age, whenever he feels ill, he stays home. She makes them both a cup of warm gill, and they both head out to the porch where they sit and talk. As usual with this too, they talk about anything and everything. The 40 hedrons, the overseers, threat to send Tian to the breeding factory, the truth of heroes and villains of the past, and even Tian's hesitance with fulfilling her duty. Joe asks her how she ended up at the manufactory. Just like everyone, she was visited by the examiners when she was young. They discovered that she had a perfect photographic memory, which they were excited by, but were then disappointed by her poor tinkering skills. Tinkering skills that allow talented artisans like Iris to make the most beautiful hedrons. Eventually, she was sent to the manufactory. Not as a princess artisan, but a normal worker who carried out duties like cleaning. That is, until one day, due to her curiosity, she found a crystal, and then going through its field, mapped and painted its entire trajectory. An extremely rare talent that is kept secretive. She was punished at the beginning because they all thought she was lying. Once they realized she was telling the truth, her training began immediately, 2 years earlier than most. Eventually, Joe asks Tian why she wanted to see him. She tells him that she's looking for a very good crystal for her controller device and needs his help. Always happy to help Tian, Joe gets up and they both make their way to the mine. Deeper and deeper down the mine they went, past areas that looked like they could collapse at any moment. Eventually, they spot a vein with a glimmering yellow crystal. Tian was drawn to it so much that she started to involuntarily walk towards it, and Zhou had to stop her before she put herself in danger. She snapped back to reality and apologized. Despite how dangerous it looked, Zhou was determined to retrieve the crystal for Tian, and after a few heart-stopping attempts, he succeeded. With a big grin on his face, he hands the crystal over to Tian. She gives him a massive hug and then looks at the crystal. It is by far the most powerful one she has ever held. Iris persistently asks Mish to wake up. Struggling to open his eyes, he sees her holding a broken controller. He asks her what happened, and she cries out to him that Tian did this. Nish doesn't believe it, and he tells her as much. But she's persistent and uses every tool in her arsenal against him, including emotional blackmail. He compromises and decides to confront Tian with her. The guards in the manufactory confirmed that Tian went towards the mine. Tyresis is quick to add that the reason Tian goes down there often is because she's selling secrets to the enemy down there. Unbeknown to Tian, she was being followed by these two as she made her way to Zhou's home. Once Zhou and Tian were on their way to the mine, they snuck into the hut. Searching the place, they found a piece of paper with Tian's handwriting. It contained the plans for the controller she was making. Iris was sure that these were the secrets she was selling to the enemy, and so they both decided to report this to the Overseer. Nish reported his findings to Overseer Gihad, but just like everyone else in the manufactory, he didn't believe it. Tian may not have close friends here, but everyone likes and respects her. Well, apart from Iris and Nish. He asks Nish to really think about who else could be responsible for the damaged controller. And although Nish doesn't reply, he knows that it's Iris. Once back in Tian's office, Nish sits down on a chair, mentally exhausted. Iris happily walks in, and her smile very quickly vanishes as Nish glares at her. The man is dripping with rage as he accuses her of lying to him. He knows she's trying to manipulate him, and it angers him greatly. She tries to deny it at first, but that didn't work. She then tried appealing to his emotion, then threats, and finally seduction. None of it worked, and she eventually admitted to trying to incriminate Tian by cutting the piece of paper from a book. But she denies having anything to do with the damaged controller. Nish believes that she didn't damage her own controller. After all, no sane artisan would do such a thing to themselves. But he warns her that he'll have to inform the Overseer of her attempts to incriminate Tian. Fear grips Iris. Although the Overseer's her cousin, the matter was serious enough for those ties to mean nothing, and the penalty was most likely death. She pleads with Mish as she slowly and seductively moves towards him. Her words are like honey, and the sight of her body even sweeter. He gives in. Upon returning from the mine with the crystal that she and Zhou had found, Tian was informed that the Overseer wanted to see her in his office. Once in his office, Gihad throws the broken controller on the table, informing Tian that she's being accused of doing this. She's shocked and assures the Overseer that even though she may not like Iris, she would never do such a thing. The Overseer asks if she thinks Iris did this herself, but Tian doesn't think so. He then tells Tian that she better find out who did, because all eyes are on her. And if Nish's father, the Perquisitor, finds out about this, going to the breeding factory will be the least of her worries. Tian suddenly remembers the last conversation she had with Nish and the way she had spoken to him. Dealing with Iris was already annoying at the very least. Now she had another enemy, and one with a powerful father as well. Now she was really worried. Once back at her desk, Tian worked hard at creating the probe for her investigation of the 40 Hedron. As she toils away, Iris walks in asking Tian about her progress. Each word spoken between the two is like a missile designed to harm. Irisis puts on the probe, and as she mockingly tells Tian that it doesn't work, she suddenly screams out in agony. She yanks off the controller and throws it down on the table while looking cross-eyed and very unstable on her feet. Tian rushes to help her, but Irisis slaps her across the face, screaming that Tian did that on purpose, which she didn't. She soon leaves Tian's office, but not before hurling insults at her first, of course. Before Tian knew it, it was nighttime. She jumped in between the cold sheets and tried to get some sleep after such a terrible day. She had a bit of a headache due to her constant use of the field, and as she slept, she dreamt. Or maybe she was hallucinating. She hears the explosions of multiple volcanoes in this vast land. Her view then shifts to a young, handsome man staring out in sadness. He calls out to her for help, but before the sound of his voice reaches her, she wakes up. She had a faint memory of a dream, and she could almost remember the smell of the volcanic sulfur. Halfway through the day, she was visited by both the overseer and the foreman who were checking up on her progress. Despite how hard she was trying, she hadn't made any discoveries yet, and as they both expressed their displeasure at this, she almost fainted. Qian was spending far too much time in the field and drawing too much power. The overseer noticed this. She regained her composure and had a plan. Very quickly, she experimented with different materials on a device, and soon enough, she had reached a conclusion. The Hedron crystals were being sabotaged, but she didn't know by whom. Yet, Tian states that she'll need a larger crystal for it, and Gihad tells her to make haste with her investigation. Noticing that she's struggling, he tells her to recruit someone else so they can work on the crystal at intervals, but she tells him that no one else can do it, as even Irisis tried yesterday and was hurt by it. He writes her an authorization note for her to take to the apothec for medication, and then the two men left. The apothec gave her a balm to use on her forehead for the headaches she was getting, and as she made her way back to her office, she asked her fellow artisans if they had seen Irisis, and one of them said she had seen Irisis coming out of Tian's office a while ago. As Tian walked towards her desk, she realized that the device she was using had been bent out of shape, and the crystal was cracked. After reporting the damage of the crystal to Gihad, Tian decided to head back to the mine in the hopes of finding another crystal. She's no miner, of course, and mining the crystal would be extremely dangerous for her. But she was reluctant to ask Joe for help again. On her way down to the lower levels of the mine, she met Joe, and as always, he was very happy to see her. She explained what happened, and even though she felt and looked guilty, her friend was more than happy to help. So further down the mine they went. They went further than they had the last time, and this area was far more precarious. In order to get the crystal she needed, they would have to work together, using props to secure the ceiling. It was extremely dangerous and difficult, especially for Tian. But she pushed herself to the limit, and after a few tries, they managed to secure the shaft. There was an abundance of powerful crystals here, but one glowing crystal stood out. She had never seen or heard of such a crystal. Unfortunately, it was far too dangerous to reach it, so Tian reluctantly settled for one that was closer. Back in her desk in the manufactory, Tian set to work. Her plan was to use her pliants and force the Hedron awake. A very dangerous plan, but at this point, she felt she had no choice. She placed the helm for the controller on her head and then pressed her pliants against the Hedron crystal. She's instantly drawn into the Hedron's field. Her breathing is slow and controlled as she searches for the Hedron's aura. She found something, a faint string of light. She follows it as it leads her through the field, through a vortex of a multitude of colors. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her head, and her pliants flared. She had done it. She had found the anomaly. Though her head was throbbing, she went back into the field. The image is different this time. A frightening, unmistakable image. a larynx, and there's a human beside it. The image slowly faded and then completely disappeared. Kian was now out of the field. Her eyes hurt, her head hurt, and she felt very unsteady on her feet. As Tian stumbled, she sees Iris, and in her haze, she tells her that she's looking for the Overseer. Scanning Tian's desk, Iris notices the devices on Tian's table. Uncharacteristically, she offers to fetch the Overseer. Overseer Dihad walks into Tian's office and Iris is right behind him. He looks absolutely frightened for Tian as he lifts her up, trying to get her to come to her senses. He tells her that Iris has accused her of trying to harm her the previous day with the device she had made. Tian replies as though she's drunk, telling the Overseer that she's being sabotaged by a person who hates her. Iris tells her cousin, the Overseer, that either Tian is the spy or she has crystal fever and has lost her mind. She walks towards Tian's desk. Pulling apart Tian's device, she shows the melted head drum, and then she pulls out Tian's destroyed appliance. Tian is horrified. It takes weeks to create a new appliance, and she would suffer from severe withdrawals and may even lose her mind entirely. Tian is too close to the solution and refuses to give up. She wraps the construct around the Overseer's head. Even though he isn't gifted with the matter arts, Tian guides him. He sees nothing and is slowly getting angry. Not at Tian, but at his inability. Suddenly, the image flashes before him and dread spreads across his face. The larynx, and the spy. While Gihad struggles to compose himself, Iris cannot contain herself. She screams out that Tian is lying and that she's only good for one thing. Before she could finish, the Overseer, her cousin, slaps her across the face. Iris is in pain, and not physically. She tries once more, but her cousin tells her that she'll be the one going to the breeding factory if she don't control her tongue. His frustration is not without merit. He informs them both that very recently the enemy had utterly destroyed a platoon of tanks. The reality of the war is far worse than the rumors. The larynx have found a way to either disable the field or destroy it. After a moment of silence, Tian spoke. Perhaps the way to deal with this new threat was to find a way to create a shield around either the nodes or the controllers. Gihad perked up. He asked both exceptional artisans to work on a solution. On his way out, he asked Tian if she needed any of the damaged items. She didn't, though it was like a spear through her heart as he took away her broken appliance. That night as she slept, she dreamt about the world she had seen before. A world that seemed to be in the midst of its own destruction. So vivid was this dream that she woke up screaming in terror. She hears a knock at her door and opens it to find a few of her fellow workers with concerned looks on their faces. She reassured them that everything was fine and they all returned to sleep. Unfortunately, every time she fell asleep, the same nightmare returned, followed by her screams. She repeated this over and over to the annoyance of her fellow workers. By the time it was morning, Tian was still screaming. Overseer Gihad burst into her room where the nurse was tending to her. He asks her what the problem is, and the nurse replies, "Crystal fever." She was about to put a straitjacket on her when Gihad sternly told her that she'd better not. She's his best artisan, and he needs her to complete the work that had saved them from the lyrics. While everyone was desperately trying to help Tian, Iris stood in the background. She looked like she was enjoying this. While everyone saw Tian screaming, in her mind she was living through the horrors of the dying world she saw in her dreams. Fortunately, by midday, she had broken out of her temporary insanity, and with Gihad's approval, she was back at her desk working on the device. As Tian worked, her door was opened, and her best friend Joe stood before her. Once they saw each other, the look of terror on Joe's face was replaced by a smile of relief, and tears filled Tian's eyes. He tells her that he feared the worst and was ready to carry Tian far away from here if he needed to. Doing something like that would condemn Joe to death, and she knew he meant every word. After discussing what happened, Joe asks Tian to be careful. He's sure that there's malice behind this, and he's also certain that Tian has a good idea where or who it's coming from. Before too long, he returns to his work at the mine, reminding her to come to him if she's ever in any kind of trouble. Tian continues to work diligently as she was determined to find the solution today. She read the forbidden book in her room and even searched through the late Master Crafter's office for more clues and components. After a lot of experimentation, she had made the breakthrough. She had found the solution to the problem. She tested it, and then afterwards wrote a report for the overseer, which she would hand in tomorrow. It had been a long day, and it was time for bed. Tian couldn't sleep. She was suffering from a migraine, so she used the balm she got from Gap Effect the day before on her forehead. Soon enough, she was dreaming, and as she dozed in and out of consciousness, someone came into her room and rubbed the entire balm all over her body. She was back in the nightmare. Tian began screaming, and she continued screaming for 8 hours until her voice was hoarse. Her mouth was open as blood dribbled out of it. Iris watches on as the overseer and many nurses scramble in and out in an effort to save Tian. She realizes that this is her chance, and so sneaks into Tian's office. She tears off the page detailing Tian's work, destroys the rest of the notepad, and then takes the controller and crystals that Tian had been working on. She then goes into her own office and locks the door behind her as she works on completing the device in an effort to claim Tian's work as her own. Overseer Gihad is beside himself as the nurses, and even the old healer confirmed that Tian has gone mad, and there is nothing they can do. Gihad is desperately angry. He needs Tian. As they discuss what to do, Iris walks in beaming from ear to ear. She hands the completed device to Gihad. With a big smile on his face, he thanks his cousin and offers her the position she always wanted. She will now become the acting crafter of the manufactory. As for the mare Tian, Gihad signs her indenture to the breeding factory. Tian is no longer an artisan. Tian drifted in and out of consciousness. And as she did that, she saw the blurry images of people around her. She didn't recognize most of them, like the strange man and woman arguing about whether this was right or even legal. And then there were faces she did recognize, like her mother and Joe. Her voice is hoarse as she painfully calls out to Joe. He looks very concerned and gently tells her to rest and get her strength back. But she tells him she still has to complete her work with the controllers. As he holds back the tears, Joe tells her that she's been out for a week, and she was screaming in pain for almost the entire time. She can't remember any of it, and as she slowly looks around, realizes that she's not in the manufactory. Tian wants to know where she is, and Joe cautiously tells her that she's in the breeding factory. It slowly dawns on her as she realizes that she's being sold to the breeding factory. Her life as an artisan is over. All that hard work, all the savings she put together to eventually free herself, all gone. She wants to let out a scream, but Joe slaps her on the cheek. Just enough for her to snap out at it as he tells her not to, else even he would think she's gone mad. But why would they sell her indenture, she asks. She'd found the solution to the headroom problem, and all that was left was to put the controllers together. Joe tells Tian that Iris had come up with the solution and handed it to the overseer, which is why he felt no need to keep her, considering her condition. She had then been promoted to acting crafter, even at her young age. Tian feels like she just got punched in the gut and tells Joe that Iris must have stolen or copied her design. Skeptically, he asks her if she's sure. She swears to it, and like the loyal friend he is, Joe believes her. Tian continues to protest, feeling the need to help her understand and maybe even accept her parents' situation. Joe tells her that it is done, and she is now a breeding factory woman. Tian will never accept this, ever. She tells Joe that she'll run away. He appeals to her, telling her what she already knows: that those who run away from their duties have no rights. Anyone can do anything to them, even kill them without penalty. Tian doesn't care, because as far as she's concerned, anything is better than this. Just then, the door swings open and the matron of the breeding factory walks in. She rudely tells Joe that visiting hours are over and he has to leave soon. After she leaves, Tian asks Joe if he'll still keep his promise to help her if she ever needed it. He says he will, of course. She then asks him to go to her room in the manufactory. She'd like him to retrieve her clothes, notepad, tools, and even the hidden forbidden book. He agrees to do it. The matron enters the room again and even more rudely asks Joe to leave. He says his goodbyes to Tian and takes his leave. The matron walks over to Tian and begins inspecting her. She goes over every single part of Tian's body. And I mean every part. Her hair, lips, teeth, dimples, chest, everything. Like inspecting cattle before taking it to market. Once the matron was done, she was convinced that with some improvements and food, she'd be able to make Tian even more appealing for her new work. It was time to prepare Tian, her nails, hair, body, all of it. The improvements began now. She was led to the bathroom, where a few ladies were ready to attend to all their needs. Tian can't remember the last time she had a hot bath, let alone something so extravagant with attendants as well. They kept her in there until her fingers and toes began to wrinkle, feeding her with all kinds of delicious food and treats while she lay in the bath. Even when she was full, they kept feeding her. After the bath and food came the perfumes, lotions, and massages. They went all out, and after all was done, the matron inspected Tian and was pleased, confident that Tian will bring in a lot of business. After more feeding, the matron led Tian to her office. As the matron searched her desk for a document, a woman came in to tell her that there was an incident involving one of the breeding factory ladies and a customer. She heads out to deal with the problem, telling Tian not to touch anything. Tian was bored as she waited, so decided to flick through some of the books she saw. These books contained information on the parents and children born here. She could find the information about her father. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough time. She heard matron's voice outside and quickly returned the ledger and sat down. After composing herself, the matron found the papers she was looking for and thrust them across the table, asking Tian to sign them. Tian refused. The matron got up from her chair, walked towards Tian, and struck her with a blow that made her crumple to the floor, winded. She asked Tian to sign it, and again, Tian refused. She prepared herself for another blow, but the matron simply returned to her chair. Tian tells the matron that she can't keep her here without her signature, to which the matron replies that Tian has been certified insane, and unless she has written proof stating otherwise, her indenture has been bought, and she is now a breeding factory woman. Tian then asks if she can speak with her mother. The matron thinks it's a great idea, hoping that Mani, a seasoned vet, will be able to talk some sense into Tian. Tian walks into Mani's room and her mother seems happy to see her. After all, she's always wanted Tian to join her at the breeding factory, and now it's happened. Of course, Tian feels the exact opposite. This place is like a prison to her. Usually, when Tian asks about her father, Mani doesn't provide any information other than to insult him. But this time, she reveals a bit more. Tian's father loved her dearly and wanted to take her away from the breeding factory, something that Mani was very much against. Not long after Tian was born, her father showed up and was refused entry into the breeding factory. Although he fought hard to try to take Tian, he was outnumbered and dragged away. Soon after that, Mani used her connections to have him sent to the front lines, and he was never heard from again. Tian screams at her mother, accusing Mani of killing her father. The argument went back and forth, and soon after, Tian left to her own room. She tried to calm herself down, and after a while decided to go for a walk. As she made her way to the doors of the breeding factory, a guard called out her name, telling her that she wasn't allowed to go outside. Tian rushes to her mother's room. As she bursts in, she tells Marnie that they won't let her go outside. Marnie tells her that while she is indentured, she can only go out once a month, during which she'd be accompanied by a guard, and she'll have a discreet wrist mantle. Tian finally realizes how much of a prisoner she really is. She tells Marnie that she had been paying her indenture with the manufactory and she only had 2 years left. Marnie then gives her the really bad news. Her indenture starts afresh with the breeding factory, and with some hard work, it'll take her between 10 to 12 years to pay it off. Tian spent the next 3 days being constantly fed, like a farm animal being fattened up. But despite all the rest and food, she was still sad. Aside from her current predicament, her mind was filled with thoughts of her father. She was determined to find out all she could about him, and that information was held in the matron's office. The matron walks into Tian's room and informs her that her duty begins the next day. She tells Tian to go to sleep as she leaves the room and locks the door behind her. It was now or never. She had to escape tonight. Once nighttime fell and the breeding factory was almost silent, she began her escape. The first thing she needed to do was get the information about her father from the matron's office. Although her bedroom door was locked, it was a simple task for an artisan like Tian to pick the lock. She moved quietly through the dark hall, and once she reached the matron's office, she used her trusty fork to break in. Noticing a locked cabinet and using a makeshift crowbar, she forced it open. She went through each ledger as quickly as possible in search for the one with her father's details. Eventually, she found the page with her half-sister's details, and scrolling down, she saw the information about her father. Unfortunately, the writing was so terrible that she could barely read it, that is, until she got to the last word written in red. Deceased. She wanted to scream, but controlled herself, tucked the ledger into her gown, and made her way out of the matron's office. The next step was to find thick clothing and some food. As she moved stealthily through the corridors, she heard the unmistakable voice of the matron speaking with someone else. She quickly hid herself, and as they walked by, she heard some of what the matron was talking about. The matron said,
"More trouble than she's worth, fat old cow. Time to put her out the door. She's got enough gold stacked away to pay for the wretched war, and then demands half of this new indenture. Skinny little thing won't survive a year. Hell, she'll probably go mad again in a month. Where'll I be? Clients won't pay anything for that."
Thinking that Marnie had gained some money from her indenture being sold, Tian wondered if her mother had betrayed her. Once the two ladies had passed by, Tian quickly made her way to the laundry room, and as she walked through the dark corridors, she heard the sounds of people calling out her name and searching for her. Once she picked the lock and closed the door behind her, she began searching for clothes, but before she could find anything, she heard the door being opened behind her. She quickly jumped into the very large laundry basket and hid herself under the piles of clothes. One of the matron's assistants walks in and starts searching everywhere for Tian. She arrives at the large laundry basket that the artisan is hiding in and begins pulling out the clothes. But just as she's about to discover Tian, the matron walks in and demands to know why she is being so slow. She lies to the matron, telling her that she just finished searching. She then stuffs the clothes back into the laundry basket, and both women leave the room, locking the door behind them. Tian waited nervously until she was certain that they had long gone. There was no time to waste. She grabbed as many clothes as she could from the basket, putting them on, so she'd at least have some warmth in the cold weather. She wouldn't even risk looking for some food to take with her. Once out of the laundry room, she stealthily makes her way to the front door of the breeding factory. Luckily, no one was there, so she once again picked the lock, making sure to lock the door behind her. She was finally outside, and the next step was to escape the city itself. Tian carefully makes her way to the main gate. Unfortunately, there was a guard there, pacing back and forth, mainly to keep warm. She watches him for a while, noticing how long it took him to walk to one end of the gate with his back to her. She needed a distraction because she wouldn't have enough time to scale the gate before he turned around. So once he turned his back to her, she ran into the gatehouse. There was a lantern there, which she used to start a small fire, then ran back out again. Once she was back in her hiding spot, she made a sound like a cat. The guard hears the sound of what he thinks is a cat, and on his way back, notices the fire in the gatehouse. He curses out loud and then desperately looks for some water to quench the fire. Tian sees her opening. She runs to the walls of the gate, scales them, and is out of the city and into the forest. She needs to move as quickly as possible because once it's daytime, the search for her will begin, and it'll be difficult to escape them. She moves through the frost and mist-covered forest and towards the mountains. Eventually, she reaches the top of one of them and decides to take a short break. It's very cold, and she wishes she'd taken some food with her. Soon after, she hears the shouts of people nearby, and thinking it's the search party, she hides herself. It isn't the search party, but a group of soldiers running and screaming down the mountain. She wonders what could have caused them to run away like that. Although there were some dangerous animals around, like the horned bear and tigers, they rarely attacked humans. Once they were out of sight, Tian tightens her clothes around her and makes her way down the mountain in the direction the soldiers were running away from. She can make out a clanker as she gets closer to the base, and there's something else there. Lyrinx. She quickly hides behind a large boulder. There were a few Lyrinx there, one eating the remains of a dead soldier, and another, with a green crest on her head, signifying a female Lyrinx, was tearing into the clanker. Once in, she rummages around for a while and eventually emerges with the clanker's controller and hedron in hand. The Lyrinx roars in triumph. A moment later, they all move out in different directions, with one heading directly towards Tian. She had no time to escape, so hid as best she could, praying it didn't notice her. The Lyrinx rushes past her, but when it reaches the top of the mountain, it stops to sniff the air. Tian holds her breath, and thankfully, the Lyrinx carries on. Once she was certain it was safe, she quickly carries on with her journey towards the miners' village. It took her a couple of hours, but eventually she arrived at Joe's home and gently pushed open the door, walking in. It looks like Joe just woke up, as he's squinting when looking at Tian. Twice, he asks who she is, and when his eyes finally open up, he drags her into his home, hastily shutting the door behind her. They give each other a big hug, and he realizes how cold she feels. He asks her to sit beside the fire while he puts a meal together for her. As they spoke and ate, their fears seemed to wash away, and it almost felt like everything was back to normal. When done, Tian asked Joe if he was able to get her tools and other items. Pulling out a bag from under his bed, he tells her that he got everything apart from her notebook, which Irisis had kept. Tian checks her tools and everything was in order, but she was still missing her pliance, which was destroyed when she first carried out her experiment. Joe could see the troubled look on her face and asked her what was wrong. She sheepishly tells him that she needs a crystal to build a new pliance. Without hesitation, he tells her that he'll get her one tomorrow, and that in fact, he'll get her the rare, pulsing crystal that they saw the last time they went into the mine. Tian remembers how dangerous it was in there and tells Joe that any good crystal will do. But he insists, telling her that he'll be fine. And besides, she's about to embark on a new and tough journey, so the least he can do is get her the best crystal possible. He tells her to get out of her clothes and warm up by the fire. And before too long, as Joe slept on his bed, Tian fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. By the time Tian woke up, Joe had already left the house, and she assumed he was at the mine. She washed herself and happily put on her own clothes, which she hadn't done in what felt like a long time. She got herself something to eat, and then made her way into the woods because she had to keep herself out of sight until Joe came back home, just in case. She found herself somewhere she could hide while keeping an eye on Joe's house for when he returned, or for anyone unusual. It was a boring wait, and as the day passed by, she suddenly noticed a figure walking through the miners' village. Looking closer, it wasn't Joe. It was Nish, and his stride seemed more confident than she remembered. She made sure she was well hidden, so he wouldn't see her. Nighttime soon came and Joe hadn't returned, so she decided to head to the mine. She thought maybe getting the crystal was more difficult than he expected. Luckily for Tian, there were no guards. She made her way down the mine, past one level, then the other, until she reached the lowest level, where the glowing crystal was, and where, unless he had already left, she'd find Joe. Tian notices a pile of rocks and, looking closer, realizes that there's a body under it. She rushes towards it, desperately pulling away the rocks until she reveals Joe's body underneath, and he's in very bad shape. She rubs her hand on his cheek, and it's warm. After calling out his name a few times, he finally responds by groaning and gently opening his eyes. She asks him what happened, and with difficulty, he tells her that he wanted to send her off with the best crystal. With a sad look on her face, she tells him that he shouldn't have done that. And as she tries to move him away, more debris falls from the ceiling. He tells her to stop, as the mine could collapse at any time. Tian protests because they have to get back to the surface, and there's no way she's leaving Joe down here. With calm in his voice, he tells her that he can't feel anything from the waist down. She still tries to protest, but he sternly tells her to listen to him. He asks her to remove his belt, which she manages to do with some effort. He then tells her to take the gold pouch from it, as well as the knife. With tears in her eyes, Tian does as he asks. She asks him if he's thirsty, and when he nods, she tries to offer him some water. An old miner like Joe doesn't want water at a time like this. Instead, he tells her to grab his flask of brandy. She gently pours the brandy down his throat. After a few gulps, and with a grin on his face, Joe tells Tian that he'll need some more. After all, it's not going to kill him. Joe closes his eyes and begins to sing an old song. Tian asks him if there's another way out of the mine, as she saw Nish at the miners' village, and she's sure they'll be searching for her by now. He tells Tian that on the 9th level of the mine, there's a secret exit. Although it was sealed off a long time ago, few know of it, and it's her best chance. She thanks him. He's less responsive when she tries to pour some more brandy into his mouth, so she calls out his name. With his last breath, he tells her that he has one more gift for her. His hand opens up, revealing a pulsating crystal, and simply touching it created an explosion of the field in her mind. She places the crystal into a pouch and turns her attention back to Joe, but there's no reaction from him. Joe is dead. Tian sobs bitterly at the loss of her best friend. A few moments later, she says her goodbyes to him and turns around, never looking back again as she walks further down the mine. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hopefully you're enjoying the story so far. If so, please like, subscribe, and leave any comments or suggestions you have below. And I'll see you all on the next one.